Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to Global Atheist News Roundup, dateline 18th of March 2023. This week's headlines. The Vatican gives the world's dioceses more time to consult Catholics ahead of the Synod on Synodality. A Southern African Anglican Church rejects blessing same-sex unions. Pastor Siva Moodley was finally buried yesterday after 579 days in the mortuary without resurrecting. Israel sees one of its biggest ever protests. Evacuated Afghan women's football team included false footballers. Israeli female soldiers testify to the Israeli army's practices against Palestinians. The Vatican announced back in May that the process leading to the Synod on Synodality would open with a diocesan phase lasting from October 2021 to April 2022. A second, continental phase will take place from September 2022 to March 2023. The third, universal phase will begin with the 16th Ordinary General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops at the Vatican in October 2023. In an address to Catholics in the Diocese of Rome in September, Pope Francis stressed the significance of the diocesan phase of the synodal process. To return to the synodal process, the diocesan phase is very important, he said, since it involves listening to all the baptized, the subject of the infallible sensus fidei incredendo, he said. The next report is from our South African correspondent, Tercia du Plessis. Welcome, Tercia.
Good evening, John. I'm coming to you from a suitably lit South Africa. The lighting suits the mood, and it concerns the Anglican Church of Southern Africa that has scrapped a proposal to allow its clergy to bless same-sex unions, while also reaffirming its outright rejection of same-sex marriage. The report comes from Mamba Online. Meeting in Gauteng from 27 February to 3 March, the bishops of the Anglican Church of Southern Africa, the ACSA, had extensive discussions on the proposal submitted by the Archbishop's Commission on Human Sexuality. The proposal would have permitted same-sex blessings to be performed in parishes and dioceses where both the priest and the congregation agreed. It would have exempted any diocese, parish and priest from having to perform these blessings if they did not wish to do so. The bishops debated the issue over 4 sessions, described as quietly impassioned but respectful. On one side, bishops expressed their unhappiness that faithful Anglicans denied the Church's blessing of their loving, faithful, monogamous, committed same-sex partnerships. Opposing bishops argued that the Church must hold true to Scripture and upholding tradition as it has been received down the ages, and should resist efforts to conform to the world.
Good afternoon, John and the Free Thought audience. Coming to you from the glorious V&A waterfront in Cape Town today to tell the sad story of Pastor Siva Moodley. This is brought to you by the BBC correspondent Solomon Izan Ashols, and it goes as follows. Pastor Siva Moodley was buried yesterday after 579 days in the mortuary. He hasn't been buried before because his family believed he was going to be resurrected, and they insisted on keeping his body in the mortuary. His wife, son David and daughter Kat weren't there at the cemetery when he was buried. He was going to be buried like a pauper until his nephew went to court to claim the body. So let's see if his resurrection can happen from underground, because it hasn't happened over a period of 579 days while the corpse was in the mortuary. Back to the studio.
Thank you, Tercia. All the best. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis rallied against the fundamentalist government's judicial plans on Saturday night, in what organisers said were the biggest street protests in Israel's history. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the changes, which would curb the power of courts, will restore balance between the branches of government. Opponents say they threaten democracy. At one of Saturday's rallies, opposition leader Yair Lapid said this was Israel's greatest crisis. In a separate development, Israeli troops shot dead 3 armed Palestinians near the West Bank city of Nablus on Sunday. The Israeli army said the gunman had fired at an Israeli army post. Palestinian officials have not commented on this incident, and there has been a marked surge in violence between Palestinians and Israelis in recent months. On Saturday, protest organisers said as many as 500,000 demonstrators took to the streets across Israel for the 10th consecutive week in what Haaretz newspaper called the largest demonstration in the country's history. About 200,000 people turned up in Tel Aviv, many carrying Israel's national flag, to rally against the planned reforms by Mr. Netanyahu's hardline government. A BBC producer in the city said the protests are the busiest yet, with a non-stop flow of demonstrators packing the streets until late into the night. In remarkable scenes, crowds applauded Tel Aviv Police Chief Amichai Eshed as he walked in uniform through the rally. On Thursday, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir had said he was transferring Mr. Eshed to head a training division, amid reports that the ultra-nationalist politician accused the commander of being too soft on protesters, whom he calls anarchists.
Well, this is the Ayalon Highway. It's the main road that runs north-south in Tel Aviv. You can see the protesters. They breached the road. Police have been trying to stop them. You can now see mounted police, Israeli security forces heading towards the protesters. This is exactly what Israel's far-right police minister said he wouldn't allow. He calls these people anarchists. They say they're fighting for democracy. They came down here, jumped over the fence. We followed them over as we were filming. They got onto the road and blocked it. And we're just going to stop here, and you can see the mounted police here. Now we watched as the mounted police came along the street. The protesters dug in. Dozens of them were sitting on the road. And at that point, they pushed them back.
A high-profile evacuation to the UK of Afghan female footballers fleeing the Taliban included a number of women who were not the top-flight players that it was claimed, a BBC investigation has been told. 35 women and their families, 130 people in total, were flown to the UK from Pakistan in November 2021. Women footballers were seen to be at risk from the Taliban, and some feared they would be punished for participating in a sport that the new regime viewed as un-Islamic. They were granted visas by the Home Office. However, BBC Newsnight has had access to the list of evacuees that was submitted to the British authorities in order to obtain entry to the UK, and while the names and other identity details are genuine, the description of the principal applicants as national players or members of a regional team in some cases appears to be false. The BBC spoke to a number of former Afghan players, coaches and officials who identified 13 individuals who they believed were not members of the teams listed. Many of the evacuees were described as members of the Herat youth team, but Newsnight tracked down the team's former coach, Najibullah Nawrouzi, who now works in women's football in Italy. He says that when he saw the list of people who were evacuated, he wondered if some of them had ever visited the Herat football ground, let alone played for the national team. I've seen people in the list who have not even worn a football strip in Herat, he said. There's resentment among genuine players now living under Taliban rule in Afghanistan that others appear to have got out with false credentials. One, who wishes to remain anonymous, told Newsnight, "The Taliban have banned sports for women and girls. We're left behind in Afghanistan with no future. It just makes me feel very neglected and very sad, because we are the real players and not some of those that got evacuated." See this video.
We used to serve our country. We served our country for sport. People who had no affiliation with football left, but we are here. We cannot do anything. I can't even go out without my husband. We are like slaves. They took away our rights. Please help. We are real sport people. Look at me. I was free. I was a free woman. Look at my chadari, my veil. I can't even walk with this veil. I cannot. Look at me, women around the world. I'm a woman like you. Many are asking why I'm left behind, as I'm a real footballer. I'm living in hiding, and I can't live freely. I don't want to stay alive. I want to die. I'm only alive for my child.
Female Israeli soldiers speak out about their army's practices against Palestinians in this video.
כאילו לא קיימים. זה לקחת עצורים ולחבוט עליהם סיגריה, זה לקחת עצורים ולא לתת להם מים ואוכל ימים שלמים, לקחת עצורים ולהתעלל בהם במכות. למשל סתם לקשור באזיקונים ולשים פלנלית על העיניים.
כאילו זה היה נורמלי שיש לך 6 או 7 גברים שיושבים כפותים על רצפה ולא רואים, ובשיא הקור בחורף, זה היה כאילו מחזה רגיל.
לא היה גבול, פשוט לא היה גבול, היינו יכולים לעשות מה שאנחנו רוצים, מה שמתחשק לנו.
הבדיחה שמאוד אהבו לעשות, זה שמגיע פלסטיני, הוא מראה לך את האישור העסקה שלו, אז אתה לוקח, מחליף למטה עם אישור העסקה אחר קרוע, מראה לו, ככה שקראת לו את האישור.
אם אתה עושה ליווי עצורים ולא הרבצת לעצורים, או לא התעללת בהם, או נתת להם אוכל, או נתת להם מים ושתייה, או השתדלת לא לייבש אותם בשמש, כל המקומות האלה, אז כאילו, מה, זה מה שעשית?
This week's Free Thought Hour has a fantastic guest. We have been lucky to get Douwe van den Heeven, an academic in the exciting fields of mechatronics and neuroengineering. Stay on this channel to find out what that is all about. And don't forget to watch Views on the News, our panel show about this very news. The GAN team will be back next week. Thank you for watching.